Unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. She's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner. Is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
Ripon Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests, are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
This is My Life DIY, and
hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Ash.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Ripon Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Dark Wolf's Den.
The Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and we are broadcasting live worldwide from a secret mountain cave hidden high up in the beautifully snow-covered peaks of the Idaho mountains. That's right, we're ripping through the electromagnetic suit, tearing through the atmosphere, and tunneling away into your radio like a quantum particle. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, February 11th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to discuss evolution versus creation. Well, not really. We're going to destroy the idea of evolution. Everybody knows Darwin's theory, and we all know it pretty well, of the evolving from the ape to man, but there's been a lot of evidence to come to light to suggest that may very well not be the case. We're going to review a lot of that tonight, and then we're going to slide our way into the discussion of the Starchild skull. That's right. How does it connect to the conversation? What has it shown us? And what have we learned about our own past? All that and more coming up here in just a moment, but first, today in history. Keeping with our cartoon theme this weekend for the Today in History, on this day in 1942, the Archie comic premiered. And ladies and gentlemen, I know that at the time it was a 10-cent comic. Today you can buy these same comics for $25 to $50 a piece. So they really have gained in worth over the years, ladies and gentlemen. In 1942, the first ever rendition of Archie in the comics. And that is today's Today in History. That's right. I love my cartoons and comics, if you guys haven't been able to tell by now. Absolutely love them. Just something about the nostalgia of comic books and cartoons, right? And speaking of nostalgia, something we were taught in school is the idea of evolution, right? That we all come from monkeys. And we remember Rupert Sheldrake back a couple months ago, or maybe last month, when we did our consciousness shows, brought up the fact that science can explain anything if you give them one free miracle, right? Like the jump from eat, reproduce, sleep, reproduce, whatever, unto what is it all about? That's a huge leap. It's just a miracle mankind just suddenly became aware of itself. And we all know that doesn't exactly fit the evidence that we've seen over many, many years. And of course, we're told that we come from apes and monkeys, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that very well may not be the case. Take, for instance, these 12 examples.
The truth of it is, we are not those guys. We are not them. There are 12 reasons among many. These are just 12 that I pick out because they're easy to deal with. The bones of humans are much thinner and lighter than standard higher primate bones. Our muscles are 5 to 10 times weaker. Our skin and adipose tissue are handicaps. The adipose tissue thing most people don't know, the fat we have under our skin. Primates, they can be cut absolutely severely, and it'll pull back together and heal. We get a cut like that, the fat, the adipose tissue is going to open it up, keep it open, we'll get infected, we will die. It's not a good adaptation, and yet we have it.
Already quite a few differences, especially the layer of fat underneath the skin, though it is only primates, I do believe, that have this, maybe only mammals, I can't remember, but just the same, for us it's much different than in the monkey or chimpanzee or ape or whatever it is said we are supposed to have evolved from, right?
Head hair and nails, ours must be trimmed, theirs don't. Theirs grow out to a certain length and stop. Where's the advantage in that? Skulls and brains, not in the same ballpark. Locomotion, most obvious, as you look, physical difference. Speech, our throats are completely redesigned. We'll look at those in a moment. Sex, there's no sign of typical estrous cycles. Genetic disorders, we have over 4,000. They have a couple of hundred at most. They have none that kill all of their offspring before they can reproduce and put it into the gene pool. We have dozens of those. So you have to ask yourself, where did we get something that is a genetic disorder that can't be passed on? It's just in there. And then chromosomes, of course, reduced from 46 to 48. No explaining that.
And we're going to continue to dig down even deeper into each one of these, but the chromosome ones really intrigue me. We'll get to that here in a little while, but we're going to go on into the discussion about the throat and how that is very much different between the primates and humans.
This is the throat thing we were talking about. Complete redesign here, just absolutely complete redesign. They can both breathe and drink at the same time, breathe and swallow, breathe and eat at the same time. Of course, you know what, when that happens to us, the milk and the peas come out of our nose. We can't really do it.
Anyone who's ever tried to hold in a drink while laughing has had this experience, right, where it comes bursting out of your nose. That is an awful experience, but it does happen to us.
Speaking of nose, our noses have developed a hood that allow us to go underwater. They try to go underwater, it just comes gushing in and we'll strangle them.
This is something else that came up either last week or week before last, I don't remember which one, but how humans' noses are shaped much differently than other creatures, except maybe one, I think it was, other primate around the world that has the hooded nose that allows it to swim, opposed to all of the rest of the primates who do not have this ability, would actually choke on the water if they tried to go under.
So complete redesign, and it also allows us to speak in the way that extra length allows us to modulate tones and be able to speak. Complete redesign.
And remember, we're not talking million years to redesign, right? We're talking overnight, according to scientism. We went from pretty much ape to human just literally overnight with that, that miracle.
Say a moment ago, this is cerebral cortex right here. And in a rat, it's a postage stamp, postcard, sheet of paper for a chimp. So you can say, well, that's sort of a transition, and then a miracle happens.
I tell you, as anti-religious as science seems to be, they sure do love their miracles, don't they?
So these just appear. Everything just appears. Everything that on life on Earth from the beginning, from the first prokaryotic bacteria, it just appears. All this stuff about gradually evolving and gradually developing, pure garbage. I wish I had more time to go into it. I don't. Just take my word for it.
Actually, I disagree with that last statement. Don't take anybody's word ever for anything, including my own. Always, 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 always do your own research. Though I do agree that the evolution angle is a problem when it comes to the fact that everything just suddenly appears in the fossil record without any pre-notion, at least to a major degree. So, I will agree with that, but I don't agree with the just trust me, never trust anything that somebody says just trust me on. That is my personal opinion. Always, always, always Do your own research.
But anyway, these are the Australopithecines, and they run from about 5 million years ago to about 3 million years ago, and they seem to disappear from the fossil record. Now, the most famous of the Australopithecines, you've all heard of her, Lucy, lived at about 3.2 million years ago, found in 1974 in the Afar Valley of Ethiopia. She was special because we got so much of her. At that time, everything we had was just shards of bone, skulls, jaws, things like that. We had body parts, and by mirror imaging, we had like 40% of her. So she taught us so much. Particularly, she taught us that we walked upright at 3.2 million years ago, which at the time was absolutely mind-blowing news to the anthropologists and scientists of the time, because they just didn't believe that hallmark of humanity could extend that far back. They believed that it came very much more recent than that freeing of the hands and created freeing of the brains. They had all kind of ways to explain how it happened. Lucy blew all that out of the water.
And yet, one more time, where scientism's narrative is completely demolished. And I love every time that happens. Just thinking how many times that has occurred, especially when it comes to what they try to tell us is our history from genetics and otherwise. Like, again, evolution, which many times has been brought into question, and quite a few times has had a lot of disproven ideas within it. Not all of it, but a lot of it has been discredited and disproven. But just the same, you've got issues here now when you've got us walking upright a lot earlier than the scientists of scientism said originally that we were. And like he said, they come up with all kind of explanations and whatnot until yet again proof showed up to completely disprove their theory. And we see that happen so many times with scientism. That's why I rail against it so heavily, is because, there's so many pieces of evidence that comes out and ruins their narrative. And that's what we're talking about tonight. We're going to build up to a really big piece here in just a little while. Probably in the second half, we will get to the Starchild skull. I know you guys are waiting on that.
Here too, though, notice the inward slant of the thigh and the knee joint is different than ours, as you'll see, but just keep it in mind. Now, Australos evolved into Homos. This is what they say, that it just is a pretty steady evolution from about 5 or 6 million years ago right on through to Neanderthal about 20,000 years ago. But if you look at it, what you're really only looking at is what's called microevolution. This is what Charles Darwin found on the Galapagos in the finch beaks and the tortoise shell changes. It's just changes in the basic shape or size of things, but it's not one thing changing into another thing. Darwin admitted, I'm seeing microevolution, I'm assuming, I'm extrapolating macroevolution, and science has just run with it and just said, okay, it has to be there, even if we can't find it, there's enough time, it has to be there. Those are the missing links that you hear about all the time. Garbage, pure garbage. It absolutely isn't there. They're still looking for missing links to anything, and they'll tell you they have it, but they really don't. It's all microevolution.
And of course, we know that scientism is well known for running with theories and teaching them as fact. And Darwin admitted himself, like he said, that it was just a theory and he didn't have any actual evidence. They've yet to find the evidence. The missing links have never been found because they do not exist. Humans did not come from primates. You don't just have a completely different species born one day, right? Now, you might have, like he said, small different changes through time, these small mutations that change the type of humans that there are, but you don't have one human completely birthing a complete different version of human. You don't have a Denisovan birthing a Neanderthal, you know what I mean? You don't have a pre-Neanderthal birthing a Neanderthal. It's slow movements and changes in the body over time that create a different type. Microevolution instead of macroevolution.
Okay, that Neanderthal that it comes up to and that we see here, and you see here in this one too, they have the skulls and they have the bones, and it's important for the Darwinian paradigm to make these guys look as human as they can. Now, they have to acknowledge that they are butt ugly humans, but they do make them look human, wearing furs all the time, although they clearly acknowledge, and they acknowledge in this magazine as well, never the slightest shred of anything to indicate a sewing mechanism that they ever got that far with their tool making, which was always very simple. So they make them look like us because it's important for people to think that there was evolution going on, when in fact there really wasn't.
Remember, these are the same guys that they swear built Göbekli Tepe. Keep that in mind. They didn't even have sewing needles, but they built Göbekli Tepe. Okay.
But here's a Neanderthal-human comparison to make that kind of clear. The Neanderthals have uniformly robust bones, much thicker and heavier than ours, a triangle-shaped rib cage versus the oval of humans, a shorter waist. They have 4 lumbar vertebrae in their lower back, as opposed to our 5 or 6, and you may not know that, but humans have 5 or 6. There are those of us that are very long-waisted. We have that extra one. Much wider pelvis, much wider hips, inward slanted thighs, inward slanted knees, very different carriage, very different walk on very different feet. We have the whole skeletons of Neanderthals because toward the end of their cycle of life on Earth, a few of them got buried. Whether they buried themselves or they were buried by the Cro-Magnons that had been with them for about 100,000 years at that point, nobody knows. Experts will tell you that they buried themselves, but if you go for 300,000 years and you're not burying yourself, why would suddenly, toward the end of your time on Earth, you start doing it? Probably Cro-Magnon influence.
Whether Cro-Magnon or whatever the outside influence, I would definitely agree that there was an outside influence that caused that type of sudden change in the thinking and idealism of the Neanderthal.
Let's talk about bipedality.
For those that may not know, bipedality is the ability to walk upright on 2 legs.
We have on record, for sure, a track laid down at 3.5 million years ago in Laetoli, Tanzania. And this is an artist's depiction of it. What happened was a volcano laid out a layer of ash. A couple went walking along. Later, a light rain came and sprinkled on their tracks and kind of set them. And then another layer of the ash came and buried them for 3.5 million years until they were found in 1978. At Laetoli and exposed like this. And when you look at it, you get so much debate about this. Experts try to say, well, that's a human footprint. It's just human, and they were walking like humans 3.5 million years ago. And it's important to them to establish that the human form is there and going that far back, so they don't really need necessarily a missing link. They can just sort of say, well, you can see that it just sort of there's more than enough time there if that's a human foot. But it's not really a human foot. This is how a human foot works. You come down on your heel, you have a heel strike, your momentum swings around your arch over to here, and then it cuts back over into the ball of your foot, which is the thruster, and it goes out your big toe. And these toes act as balancers and thrusters after the big toe gets you going.
Which, as we know, is the standard way that we all walk. But with the foot tracks that they found, it was completely different. More of a flat-footed walk where the joints and knees would have been bent constantly, whereas that would be quite painful to us to walk like that.
Now, where do we find that kind of walk in our world? We find it with the hominoids. Now, hominoids, for those of you who don't know, is the term collectively for all types of the hair-covered upright walking primates that cover the world. You have 4 different kinds, basic kinds. You have the giant kind, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, 8 to 10 feet tall, 700 to 1,000 pounds.
And speaking of Sasquatch, there's a reason that I haven't done a Sasquatch show yet. I've thought about it a couple times, but I have a friend that is a Sasquatch hunter, and I'm going to do an interview with him soon, so I'm actually holding off on that topic until I can get him on the show. So we will be doing a show about Sasquatch coming up. That I can promise you. I just don't know when.
You have 2 man-sized kinds. You have the Almas and the Yeti, abominable snowman type. The Alma type is common in Russia, and they are man-sized, 5 to 7 300 to 500 pounds, and you have the Yetis, which are a more primitive kind, and then you have the pygmy kind, about 4 feet tall, and they live in a band around in the jungles that are around the equator, and that would be your hobbit and your small yowie here, your larger yowies or the other kinds. They live on absolutely every continent except Antarctica.
I dare say there's most likely a version that lives in Antarctica. We just haven't had reports yet because there's not as many people that live in Antarctica, right?
In America, they are found in every state except Hawaii. You'll get reports of them. I've done incredible research in Oklahoma, which is in the center of the country. Don't have time for those slides and stuff here, but just they're out there, they're real, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, where exactly do those guys fit into the evolutionary line? I've never seen them on the evolutionary chart.
This one is the famous one, Patty, that you've seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film. Very real, no matter what you hear. This film has been studied second only to the Kennedy assassination. We know a ton about it. And as you see her walk, you see exactly that walk that I was talking about. You see her walk like that, not locking her knees, doing this. And she's slightly knock-kneed. If you watch the film, you can see very clearly her knees turn in just a little bit as she walks. You also see her muscles flex in her thighs and her buttocks, and particularly in her arms. And as she turns to see the camera, you see her breasts sway in a perfectly natural, human-like breast tissue type way. This was real in 1967. Anybody that tells you anything different just hasn't studied it or has an agenda or some axe to grind.
For those that don't know, the Patty Gimlin film is the film of the Sasquatch walking down the creek, the one that has been accused many times of being a fake, but there's a lot of evidence, like he said, it's been studied second only to the JFK film that suggests that that was a real deal film and a real Sasquatch caught on camera.
This is a standard stride of a hominoid, Bigfoot type foot, and you see that this gentleman has to do this. I just pointed out that if somebody was making these tracks and faking them so that they would kind of look normal, not ones where you just press them in and they're all flat and everybody knows that that's wrong, but where you can actually tell that they're real tracks, it would have to be somebody like my size doing this with 300 or 400 or 500 pounds on their back. It just isn't going to happen. You can't fake. For the people that really know what they're looking at, you just can't fake that. Humans can't walk like this. Humans can't leave those tracks to the depth that the best ones are left.
And that's a good point that a lot of researchers don't take into consideration when it comes to Bigfoot tracks, is the depth thereof would be impossible for a human to do. We just don't have enough impact on the ground to make such a track.
Now, the Myosin Era, let's talk about that. The Myosin Era goes from 23 million years ago to 5 million years ago. Remember the Lucy and her crowd, the Australopithecines, appeared about 5 million years ago. So up to there, you have from 23 million years back, 18 more million years. Mammals expand in great numbers and proliferate. Monkeys have existed for 10 million years at that point. About 35 million years ago they started, 33, and are the dominant primates in heavily forested areas. Tailless apes appear suddenly, as everything appears suddenly in the fossil record, absolutely everything, and expand to as many as 40 genera containing as many as 100 species, everywhere and lots of them. The apes quickly overwhelm the monkeys to become the dominant primates in heavily forested areas, and that includes jungles. By the end of the Miocene, at around 5 million years ago, 90% of the apes have gone extinct and monkeys have again become dominant. Where did they go? Where did the 90% go?
As mysterious as it seems, because there's no record of any reason for these extinctions to have occurred, it may not have occurred at all. There actually may be an alternate reason why the fossils suddenly dried up, if you will.
I have a lot of information about the coelacanth, and all they have to do is move to where fossils aren't made. It's really all they have to do. In heavily forested and jungle areas, fossils aren't made. Very few. They have literally just a handful of gorilla and chimp fossils, and all of them are in debate. They just don't make them. So what if instead of going extinct, they just went where they don't make fossils? That's the hominoids. That's what happened. They didn't go extinct. No event, no big extinction event like the thing that took out the dinosaurs happened. It just didn't happen. They're still with us.
Now that would make a lot more sense and go a long way to explain Bigfoot. A lot better than the explanations that we have right now anyway. They didn't disappear, the major apes, the great apes. They merely moved into a forested area, and over time microevolutions occurred, and they've become a more hidden species like the Bigfoot. They've gotten smart against mankind, which if we see what mankind does to most species, who can blame them, right?
Okay, the book that provides proof. I've been saying, and I've been speaking like this for about 10 years now, and I've been saying the same thing every time, but I had no proof. I've been saying the hominoids, if the hominoids are real, they have to extend back well into the Miocene. They have to. They have to. But there was no proof that I knew about. But recently, last year, a book came out, The Upright Ape, A New Origin of Species, by Dr. Aaron G. Filler, who is an MD, PhD, who studied evolutionary theory under a number of leading biologists and anthropologists. He is now the top, or one of the top, spinal doctors in the world. This guy knows spines and how spines relate to the development of animals from a mainstream perspective, however, better than anybody in the world. And when he brought this book out, the roof flew off. Because why? He had proof and showed that there were upright walking Miocene apes at 21.6 million years ago with a creature called Morotopithecus that had been found in 1968, the year I graduated from college. And it was so bizarre, it's one of those things where science gets these things that are really bizarre, and they say, we can't deal with it, we put it aside. And they did, just put it aside. 20, 30 years, nobody fooled with it.
Another wonderful aspect of scientism, if it doesn't fit the narrative, put it under the rug.
But it was there, it was real. Lumbar vertebra that didn't make sense, didn't match because they looked too human-y. And you couldn't have that at 21.6, so it had to be a mistake. It just had to be some kind of mistake. And he, because of who he is, found out that no mistake, Morotopithecus 21.6 million years ago, lumbar vertebra of an upright walking creature. And you also have, in the meanwhile, it's been found that Pyrrholopithecus, Catalonia 13 million years ago, Oreopithecus, East African Italy 12 million years ago, Gigantopithecus, we don't know about it because we only have head and body, but we have big feet, we have Sasquatch. It's fair to assume that they were probably walking upright too, but we don't have any postcranial bones on them to nail it down yet, but we can get them. And in Sahelanthropus, we have 7 million years ago. So you see the pattern. There were upright walkers all the way back. Exactly what I've been saying. This is what this guy says. But you know how he interprets that? He says, well, the apes started out walking upright, and then they decided to go down on all fours for some time.
Does anyone else think that's one of the most ridiculous things you've ever heard? To what degree of evolution would that help? We're walking upright, so let's devolve, right? I don't know, we see mankind evolving in my opinion sometimes, but just the same, we haven't made it down on all fours like they did. I think that's kind of a goofy interpretation, but that's my opinion. What do you guys think?
Okay, down on all fours, what would you want to do that for? Where's the advantage of that? That's what he says. Like 20 million years, and then they decide, well, we'll do better down on the ground. Doubt it. But that's how the mainstream has to put it out there.
They got to keep their narrative going, of course. They, heaven forbid, should actually look into something that they might be proven wrong with their narrative about.
It is absolutely certain now that a wide variety of bipedal hair-covered primates, hominoids, have inhabited Earth for more than 20 million years. They are the planet's only indigenous bipeds. Therefore, human beings have no place in the flowchart of life on Earth. We did not evolve here. And that is what the intervention theory is all about. That's what I'm all about. That's what my work is out to show, that humans didn't evolve here. We were put here.
This is an idea that I am not opposed to subscribing to. I'm going to say, because I've actually thought about this quite a bit, from why do we sunburn still if we evolved with the sun, with the planet, to why does most of the stuff on the planet try to kill us, and just a number of ideas that make you wonder, did we really evolve with the Earth, or is there a chance that maybe we were transplanted to Earth at some point?
But this is how it works basically. You all know about genetic engineering, and you know this goes on today. We are able to splice out pieces and put new pieces in. Take this piece out, put that piece in, and make new things happen. We're doing it all the time. If we can do it now, you can imagine that thousands of years ago, if indeed aliens were here, came here for any reason and spent any time here, and I think the evidence is overwhelming that they did, they could do it too. And they could get what they wanted. And you may know that in the in the intervention theory, the idea is that there were a race of beings here called the Anunnaki, and that they created us to be their slaves and their servants. They were not particularly concerned about making us perfect. They just wanted to get us out into the workforce. And so they left a lot of mistakes, and that's why we are what we are. They did not take a lot of care with us, apparently.
And of course, if you've listened to this show for any amount of time, you know that we've talked about the Sumerians quite a bit, in the Anunnaki, and the stories of them coming down and creating mankind. And if you looked into Zechariah Sitchin and the stories of the Sumerian tablets and the translations thereof, you know, it would make a lot of sense. But that's only if that story is true, and if you believe the Sumerian, quote, mythology, end quote. But we are going to have to go ahead and take a network break right here, and ladies and gentlemen, we will be back with the second half of Darwin's Downfall, the Starchild skull, and we'll dig much deeper into the alien creation theory in the Starchild skull right after these messages. Don't you touch that dial. That's right.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, it's AJ, the Ripon Rabbit. Are you enjoying the Dark Wolf's Den show this evening? I know I am. If you haven't done so already, please make sure to thumb up this video, hit that subscribe button, and ring our bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. If you're listening on demand after tonight's broadcast, feel free to comment in the video below. We'd like to hear from you. I'll return again tomorrow night, Friday, February 12th, 2021, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Come along with me as we dive down the rabbit hole of get-rich-quick schemes. We're going to take a look at what has been successful, what works, and what absolutely is snake oil and doesn't work at all. It's just a get-rich-quick scheme. Come along with me tomorrow night and find out exactly the inner workings of how some of these monies are made and lost. Then Saturday night, we'll take an exclusive journey through the rabbit hole of ghost towns. We're going to find out which ones are active and which ones remain still a mystery, and which ones are in process of being revived. Could ghost towns make a comeback? Oh, I don't know. We'll have to find out. That's going to be Saturday, February 13th, 2021, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. All shows start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, right here on the very best of Common Sense Radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole. Then we'll end out the weekend right together Sunday night, February 14th. Can you believe it? Valentine's Day. Nothing could be fitter than an episode on anger on the most celebrated day of love, Valentine's Day, Sunday, February 14th, as we end out the weekend together right with a little bit of anger in our hearts. If you haven't done so already, please make sure to hop on over to the riponrabbithole.com. That's RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. It's a lot of fun. You can sign up for a Backstage Pass. It's absolutely free to do so. Always will be. And it's going to unlock a bunch of extra bonus features for you, including Down the Rabbit Hole, our social media network, and even our groups, as well as the Backstage 24/7 VIP chat lounge, where the conversation continues after the show. If you haven't been there, I strongly encourage you to jump on over and follow us down the rabbit hole. It's such a fun place. I enjoy meeting new people. Kathleen Nelson, who was a guest on last week's show, Looking Up, actually registered and has been posting some amazing footage, videos, and pictures, and a lot more down the rabbit hole. Give us a visit. We'll return you back now to Jerry Hicks and the Dark Wolf's Den for Thursday, February 11th, 2021.
Hello. Introducing lasers. Hello.
This is My Life DIY, and
Hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Oz.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Ripon Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Mita, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Dark Wolf's Den.
The Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, channeling my inner Ed McMahon there, like the old Johnny Carson show. If you know what I'm talking about, I've just dated myself. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den show for Thursday, February 11th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get back into our topic tonight, the downfall of Darwin, I would like to point out something really, really fun. If you want to go over to the riponrabbithole.com, that is RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. That's right, you're going to click on the hot at the top list there, and you're going to find the vote for Bernie best of memes. And if you don't know, Bernie Sanders has been all over social media lately, not for anything he said particularly, but if you remember the inauguration, he sat there with his arms crossed and had those gloves on, those mittens, and it became such a viral meme, and people have done so many crazy and funny memes about it. So if you want to submit yours or vote for your favorite, go on over to the riponrabbithole.com. That is RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. That's right, and click on the hot and the vote for Bernie memes, which is number one in the hot section right now. Open list, 12 submissions so far, and I think there are some in the wings waiting to be added to the list that we will get to and get added on there just as soon as we can. So do check that out. Speaking of checking out crazy and fun things, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are talking about human evolution, or the lack of evidence for the evolution theory we've been given. And before we went to break, we were talking about the idea that maybe we weren't exactly evolved here, but maybe we were placed here by the Anunnaki, as we've talked about many times, the Sumerian mythology of the Anunnaki, and perhaps that is the case, and we're going to dig in to why that may be super important. And of course, we're building up to that amazing Starchild skull.
But anyway, getting back to this, so it says that the intervention theory contends, and I believe that all of the domesticated plants and animals on Earth, including us as domesticated animals, were genetically engineered and created. And the evidence for it is abundant. The cheetah, I think, is one of the best examples.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those that may not know about the cheetah, prepare to have your mind absolutely blown. Check this out.
Because the cheetah is one of the oldest cats, and it is the most easy to domesticate. And over through history, through India and the Middle East and in Africa and the places where it is, they were kept as pets, like house pets. Very easy to train, very obedient to humans.
Could you imagine having a cheetah as a house pet. Wouldn't that be something?
Trained to be that way. But also they're very unusual in that they are the absolute ideal masterful land hunter on the planet. They can go 70 miles an hour for bursts, and if you have a trained cheetah, boy, you have it made if you're a hunter. Just turn it loose and it'll get something for you.
All right, all you hunters out there, drop the bird dogs, get yourselves a cheetah. Much, much better hunting animal, right? But there's another secret about the cheetah you may not have known.
But the interesting thing about them is they're a mixture of cats and dogs. Nobody doubts it. They're one of the weirdest animals out there. They're clearly a mixture of cats and dogs.
I was completely unaware that there was a mixture of a cat and a dog, especially it being a cheetah. I really did not know that.
That is, the brown fur is cat fur, the black fur is dog fur. They are unlike cats in a number of ways: big lungs, big hearts, extra spine so that their feet in full flight can go way out in front here to add that extra speed. And they have dog feet because you can't run at 70 miles an hour and make high-speed turns on a cat's foot. It's too soft. So they have dog pads, heavy, and claws permanently extended so they can get, it's like track shoes, wearing track shoes on your feet. And that's what they have.
Which means they would also have a completely different chromosomal setup than all the other big cats. And speaking of chromosomes, a little bit ago in the first half, the speaker mentioned that the chromosomes in humans are different than the chromosomes in other animals. Well, there might actually be a reason for that, too.
So what happened? How did we lose 2 whole chromosomes and be us? Well, we didn't actually. If you look at the human, chimp, gorilla, orangutan, and go down through all the chromosomes, and this is just an excerpt from a picture that has it all, you see that for the chimp, gorilla, and orangutan, the second and third has been fused right here in a way that nature really isn't going to be able to do. Now, science will tell you, oh yeah, nature does that because we find it all over the place. They find it in domesticated plants and animals. And in fact, in plants, they find wild stuff like multiples of chromosomes. So these people knew what they were doing, but they just did a very slapdash job on us, apparently, because they could have done a lot better, and they didn't have to leave us with 4,000 genetic disorders, many of which kill us before we can pass them into the gene pool.
But if you remember the original Sumerian story of the Anunnaki, the only reason they created humans to begin with was a slave race to mine their gold. So they didn't necessarily have to worry about the extension of life. They just wanted something to last long enough to get the gold out for them, right?
So it's pretty clear we are genetically engineered, and this is just one of the really obvious signs of it that science just ignores.
And I can't say that I am even a little bit surprised that scientism would ignore the data for the narrative. Go ahead, put a 1 in the chat room if you agree. You're not surprised at all that scientism would ignore the data for the narrative. Put a 2 in the chat room if that surprises you and you think the scientism would actually look at the data and not just carry on their own story. The problem with scientism is eventually there's enough evidence that builds up to really suggest that they had no idea what they're talking about. And eventually they finally do turn around. It just takes way too long. And there's a growing body of evidence, of course, as we've seen tonight in this category. However, there was an artifact found in Mexico in the 1930s which may go ahead and put a nail in the coffin on this discussion of Darwinism, and may actually prove once and for all that humans did not originate here. Or even if we did, it would prove that we are not the only creatures in the universe, or the only creatures to have visited the Earth. Check this out, ladies and gentlemen. This is called the Starchild skull, and it is definitely causing a downfall for Darwin.
Starchild is, after 8 years of scientific testing on this remarkable 900-year-old skull, strongly indicates it is a human-alien hybrid. And we're going to go through now and look at, first of all, its physiological differences, what makes it what it is physiologically. Then we're going to discuss what it might be. And then we're going to look at the tests and some of the testing results, and we're just going to have to skim the highlights. Okay, if you look at the comparison, this is a human and the Starchild that were found together. Now let me give you a little background story. It was found 1930 in Mexico. A young girl about 14, 15 years old, didn't know how old she was. She went to visit a village where her parents had come from. When she got there, they said, don't go in the mine tunnels and caves in the area. That's taboo. You can get killed. She snuck off as soon as she could, teenager, you know, and went looking and found in a mine tunnel, not a cave, a mine tunnel. And this is an area about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua, so it's high desert-like a lot of what you have here, where there are caves and mine tunnels in the area. She went in, and as she walked in, she found a human skeleton lying on its back. Human skeleton, small, she said, and you measure the skull, and it's somebody about 5 feet tall. Beside it, she noticed a mound of dirt beside it, and coming out of that dirt was what she called a misshapen hand. And that misshapen hand coming out of the dirt was wrapped around the upper arm of the skeleton lying on its back. Okay? That means that the Starchild skeleton died, and this woman, we know it's a woman, buried it, and then she laid down beside it, wrapped its hand around her arm, and killed herself. She was willing to die with it. So we thought for a long time that was its mother. Later in the testing, we found out, no, they were not biologically related. So she was either its caretaker, its lover, whatever, but she was willing to die with it. So it's a pretty dramatic scenario, whatever it was.
I know it's very morbid, but that just fascinates me. That she had laid down and took her own life when the child also was gone, and that is just because there's no biological connection there as shown in the DNA. That is really odd to me. It could have been a caretaker or something, but I don't know, just really, really strange, that part of the story, huh? One main difference in the Starchild skull is just the overall weight and design of the skull itself, the actual bone itself.
You'll feel the difference in the weight immediately. The bone here is half as thick as it ought to be. It weighs half as much, and it's 2 or 3 times harder. The biochemistry of it is it's more like tooth enamel than bone.
The biochemistry says it's more like a tooth enamel than a bone. That's interesting.
And it has, as you'll see later, fibers woven through the matrix of the bone. Very, very different. Very different.
I've never heard of fibers being woven naturally through the matrix of a bone. That's really weird. That's definitely not a human trait.
And you see the eye sockets. Normally a human eye socket's about 2 inches deep. Those 2 knuckles of my finger would go in and touch the optic foramens at the end. As you can see here, it's about 7/10 of an inch, less than that. And everything's been shoved down to the middle, so if it has eyes like we do, they're down here rather than up where they go. Very different physiological designs. And all of these physiological differences that you're going to see are genes telling it to grow that way. This is not a deformity. It's a very symmetrical skull.
If the eyes are lower, that means it would have a larger forehead. And that is one example that we've heard by the description of some aliens, is especially the human-looking ones more so, of course. They have the larger foreheads, it's reported. So if the eyes were lower, the forehead would be larger. It's just an interesting thought, but the idea that it is symmetrical suggests that it's not deformity, and there's actually other evidences also to suggest that it's not just a weird deformity.
This is not human deformity. This is not the way deformity works. It's not that symmetrical, and it doesn't take away the weight of the bone. This is different.
And that's yet one of many differences, but the next one is even more astonishing.
Now this, I want to really pay some attention here because I want you to get a sense of how remarkable this is. A normal human brain sits above the cerebellum right here, and the cerebellum is about the size of your fist, and it's sitting right back here in the cup of the scoop of the back of your head, some of the thickest bone, best protected, and you got the thick neck over it. This thing is well protected because it is basically you. All of this up here, for as much as the brain will do, this is it. The eye, optic nerve, works on about 1 million neurons, about 1 million, gives us vision, incredible. There are about 200 million in here. This controls area. This is your motherboard, basically. Okay? So it's got 3 pounds of brain sitting on it for the course of your life. So it's protected, and on the inside in here, if you stick your finger in, you feel ledging, you feel a bump here, there's a bump in here, and there's flanges of bone to give it something to kind of hook on and hold itself together, which it will over the course of your life. Starchild, very different. It's no bump. Its ridges they're kind of there, but they're so flat. They're just not there. They're very, very reduced. And yet, it's got so much more brain in here. This is the size of a 5-foot woman we talked about. 1,200 cubic centimeters she has of brain. You pour flaxseed in her neck hole and pour it out, 1,200 cubic centimeters. If you were to pour flaxseed into our brains, everybody sitting in here just about, except the kids, you would have an average of 1,400 cubic centimeters. Average, 1,400 cubic centimeters, which is right. So you got 1,200 cubic centimeters. You put us in here, you got 1,400 cubic centimeters. The Starchild is exactly the same size as her. And that's why we have a smaller human skull out there so you can compare them by size. We've got about a 12-year-old out there. Okay, so it should have 1,200 cubic centimeters, right? Maybe a little more because of the shallow eye sockets, and it has no sinuses, which we'll see in a minute. But it has expanded parietals, but it's got all this missing, so it shouldn't be 1,600 cubic centimeters. 1,600, fully 1/4 more than it ought to have, 400 more, and we cannot figure how that redesign in there. And you can't break it open and see, but it really is it's an amazing statistic. One of the things that needs to be examined and explained in much greater detail than we've had the money to do up to now.
And it reminds me of the elongated skulls and the fact that these skulls actually had a wider volume inside than a regular human skull. You can elongate a human skull every which way, but it's still going to have the same volume inside. No matter how you reshape the skull, the inside is going to stay the same as far as the amount that it could hold. However, the elongated skulls that have been found around the world don't have this. They have a much larger brain capacity area, and as well as this Starchild skull having, by whatever odd redesign of nature, having the more amount of volume inside the brain cavity than a normal human would have. So the evidence is pointing more and more to this not being anything that could have been in a human evolution cycle, yet we know it exists because we've got the evidence.
But the real key here is that all of this brain here, pressing down on this here, should have killed this thing shortly after birth. Why? Because when you have water on the brain or any kind of pressure in your head, the first thing that happens is that you will start spreading out here, but you'll also start squeezing out your neck hole. Your cerebellum will start squeezing out the neck hole, and that's going to kill you because the bones are soft, and the pressure is it's just right there to go out. The pressure here should have slid right out the hole, but it didn't. It didn't. So the brain guy, that first one that saw this and felt it and did it, he said, these things either didn't have brains like we have, didn't have a cerebellum, or it's made out of something much harder, much firmer, different. Different, 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 different. I can go on and on. This thing is different.
Another really, really odd fact about the Starchild skull, you know how most humans have a series of plates that make up the skull, and when you get to a certain age, they finally all fuse together in what is called sutures. At least they used to be. I think they're still called that. Anyway, you can see it in a human skull, the different plates of the skull. Well, the Starchild skull doesn't fuse like that. It only fuses with one line. Two halves fused together, which we find mainly in the reports of the Greys, but this was not a Grey, as they later found out. But even the brain plates, or the plates of the skull, are completely different than a normal human. Like he was saying, different, completely redesigned, a complete different version of human. And there's only one of them, so it's not like it was a colony or whatever. It was found with something that was a normal human holding it. Remember, keep that in mind. So this could have been, one strange offshoot that never made it, or again, there's evidence to suggest it wasn't just a random mutation, a random mistake, if you will, deformation. It was a redesign some type. It was a different type of creature. Human-ish, but not human. And I know that's a wild claim, but I promise the evidence will continue to bear out the facts.
And yet, its genes are telling it to do this, not some kind of deformity, because it all worked together. How did it know to make the changes that it made? How, for example, did the chewing muscles know to go down? This is the chewing muscle stretch on a human, and this is the Starchild. Now, we know its face was very much smaller, but what came first? The shrinking of the chewing muscles or the shrinking of the face? We don't know. We just know it's very different. This is the bone surface of a normal human. These little pockets here, lamellae, they are where bone. You know how you supposedly change your cells out every 7 years, you're constantly changing? Well, the bones, some of these, the bone goes in, some of these, the bone comes up. They're just more or less missing on the Starchild. Well, if you're a deformity, why are you missing those? This is genes telling it to grow a different way. It's a different thing.
If it was one mutated piece of gene, the rest wouldn't mutate to match. That's not the way mutation works. It generally, one thing will mutate, but everything else stays the same. Just because your eyes gain a mutation to where they're, blue is considered a mutation. So just because you have blue eyes doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a certain color hair or a certain shape of a hand, right? Everything else is going to remain the same except the eyes.
These teeth are this is a Starchild tooth, very stressed. The light here is not good, but you can see chips on the enamel, you can see cracks, and those are not post-mortem. When they're dark like that, they occurred during life and got coloring in them. So that's called crazing. And to do that, it takes a lot of wear and tear. So children don't get it. This is not a child's tooth. This is a well into life tooth. We were first led to believe that it was a child by the first x-rays, and that's why we called it the Starchild, but later we found out that it wasn't. So it's really not a child. We don't really know how old it was when it died. Now, that's the physiological part of it. Let's talk about what it might be.
So the evidence suggests that the Starchild was not a child at all, actually had lived later on into life. So it was a very short creature, a small creature of some type. Whether it was human or not, still again yet to be determined. We'll get to that here shortly. But it was definitely a smaller creature than a normal human, as well as being much older than just a child.
Now we're going to talk about the money shot, the testing that we did for DNA. Okay, now I need a little background on this. The key to this has always been DNA. The key to anything is DNA because it's the #1 scientific tool. It's the thing that they use to prove everything. So if you can use their tool, you can take their spear and run them through with it. And that's what I'm trying to do, and that's what I intend to do.
And wise advice in more than one arena for sure. Use their tools against them. Use their own spear to run them through with. And I've been known to do this on a multitude of things, especially when you are on a social media platform that is a bit of a bully, so you post everything that you know they don't like. Yeah, things like that. Using their own platform of lies to spread truth. Using their weapons against them. I like this advice in all arenas. But now we're to the fun part, ladies and gentlemen. The part that really bears out the evidence. The DNA, right? You can talk about physiological differences and make assumptions all day. But now let's get down into the hardcore evidence. What about the DNA? What does it got to say?
When we did the first test, the first tooth went, and it went to Vancouver, British Columbia, and they contaminated the sample, and the tooth was lost. It's a long story explained in the book. Mistakes were made. because there was no lab at that time in 99, late 99. There were 6 labs in the world that could work with ancient DNA. Now I have to explain some DNA to you.
We hear the words DNA testing thrown around a lot, but we don't really hear about the actual process and a little bit deeper into the meaning of the DNA and what is ancient DNA opposed to modern DNA. This right here that you're about to hear is very important.
There is modern DNA, which is up to 50 years. Anything within that's pretty easy to recover and pretty easy to read. Over 50 years, it becomes ancient. Okay? The Starchild we know from carbon-14 testing is 900 years old. 900 years old, and the human found with it. They both died at the same time, both date out at the same 900 years plus or minus 40 years. So that's old. However, they were buried in a mine tunnel, so that's really the equivalent of being in a climate-controlled storage locker. That is not being out in the ground, not being rained on, not having sun beating down on it like the Kennewick man that they couldn't recover anything from. We assumed that the genetic recovery here was going to be very good, very easy, very clear. Perhaps, even though they're 900 years old, they would be, like less than 50 years. So the lab in Vancouver, we could not get one of those 6 labs to take it on, to do it. We don't want anything to do with anything like this. This is garbage. We don't believe in it. We don't even want anything to do with it.
And a lab that is so sure that it's not right should take it on just to prove to themselves yes or no, right? Not that you could trust their answers. They'd probably come back and say no regardless, but still, I think it should have been looked at the time. But of course, we can't be surprised that scientism is scared that their narrative will be challenged or even proven wrong, because as we know, it has been done so many times, and if they can stop the funding into stuff like that, then they can, stop the ability to get the answers that are going to hurt them, especially when you can stop the actual research into something like the DNA of something. Well, you can't allow them to gain or garner the evidence that they need because you refuse to work with them to do such. So, I mean, it could be very frustrating, but that actually has changed over the years.
So this lab in Vancouver was a dental lab, and they were just a forensics lab, but they said, we'll try. We were not really equipped with all the safeguards that are required, but we'll try. They tried, they failed. 3 times, didn't work. It turned into a real mess, a 3-year blow-up. We just had to sit on it for 3 years. Nothing could happen. Couldn't make anything happen, had to go bankrupt. It was a mess. And so I put out the word to my mailing list that I was done with the Starchild. I was kaput, and that was it. And then a woman in England, Belinda McKenzie, contacted me, and she said, what would you need to put this back on the road? I've just come into some money, and I'm willing to help. And so I clocked it up for her, and I said, this is what it would take to get it tested again, to get it tested now, 3 years later. And 2 weeks later, her check was there. We were back in business just when, boy, they say it's darkest before the dawn. That was exactly the case there. So we found a new lab at University of California at Davis, 2 young guys starting their ancient DNA lab. They had worked on the Kennewick man, in fact, and they said, we'll do it, we'll take your money, we'll do it.
And of course, you would think this would be the easy part. However, this is where things went from weird to downright almost impossible. And yes, I know that's a word I don't even like. It's a curse word to me on this show, but things got really strange and darn near to physically impossible. Check this out.
And so they did. And so the first thing you do is you cut the bone out. When they cut the human, it just, Dremel blade, circular blade on the end of the thing, 4 cuts, and you cut a square, it drops out the neck hole, 1-inch square, that's it, done. And it was kind of smoky, and it bone powder, and it smelled like drilling teeth, kind of bad.
So far, completely normal. That's about to change.
So they did that, and then got ready to do the Starchild, and I remembered that the Canada people 3 years ago had said, this bone's really hard to cut, but that's all they said, and it didn't register with me. And I said, okay, so it's hard to cut. It just didn't make sense. When these guys got on the Starchild, they put the Dremel blade, and they just like they did with the human one, it went boop, and it just popped the drill up. The torque of the drill hitting the bone just popped it up. And he did like that, and he looked at his partner and said, whoa, and he went, really hard, pressed it, boom, the room filled with smoke, just bone powder. Stink like it would gag a maggot. It was really bad. It was really bad.
So much more incredibly tough, and then when it did finally get broken into, it filled the room with much more disgustingly smelling bone powder than the human did. Interesting.
We were just running for the windows, opening the door, but he stuck with it because he had started, and it was amazing. It really was. It really was. And they said right then, they said, man, this is a little bitty thin piece of bone doing all this. And he said, you really need to get this checked first. So there is a solution that you put bone in. You put it in a rocker in the solution. It rocks for a week, and it dissolves human bone. And then they have the liquid that they start the process to break it down and create the DNA testing that they're going to do. They put the Starchild in its little piece of liquid in the human. The human's gone in a week. Starchild's not gone in a week, not gone in 6 weeks, not gone in 6 months. They turned it off after 6 months. But it just doesn't dissolve in that.
That is absolutely huge. He went through that pretty quickly, but let's go back and refresh that just a little bit. So you put a human bone in this liquid, what do you say, 6 hours or whatever, 6 days, some odd, it dissolves and is gone, and you start the process of the DNA extraction. 6 months later, the Starchild bone still has not deteriorated into this liquid. Clearly, this is not a human bone by any means, a completely different chemical genetic compound.
But they took another piece of it, and they put it into a real strong detergent called Tween 20, and that dissolved it overnight, so they were able to get the recovery. So now it's time to do it, and there's two types of DNA you want to recover. There's mitochondrial DNA, which is the mother, from the mother. In a cell, you have the nucleus, and then you have the outer cell, and in there you have the cytoplasm, and floating in there are little chips of mitochondrial DNA about 16,000 base pairs long, and that comes down from your mother, from the females. Females pass down mitochondrial DNA. Inside the nucleus, the nuclear DNA, that's the whole genome, all 3 billion base pairs, all 46 or 48 chromosomes or whatever of mother and father in the nucleus, and floating outside is the mitochondrial DNA. Got it? Mitochondrial DNA is easier to recover. It's like little grains of sand, so it's easier to recover. That's what they recover from the Neanderthal way back. 6-7 years ago, Svante Pääbo recovered some mitochondrial DNA from a Neanderthal and made it look like the Neanderthal was not really related to us. Neanderthal comes into this in a minute. So they did the mitochondrial DNA of the human skull, and they got, as you see, a nice, bright, clear recovery. This is just the Jason, his DNA that they always put, and this is called primer dimer, to make sure that the gel sheets are working. That's all, just to make sure the gel sheet is working and not working on a dead sheet. So they recovered, and this is haplogroup A for the adult, and it just is a common Mesoamerican mitochondrial DNA type. Its mother was haplogroup A. This is the Starchild's. Haplogroup C, this is Jason's. And this is a primer dimer. These 4 are haplogroup C for the child. Again, another Mesoamerican type. So the Starchild's mother is without question human. Starchild's mother is without question human, and it's a bright and easy, clear recovery. These skulls are in good shape.
So the mitochondrial DNA at least showed that the mother was human, however...
So now we're to the nuclear DNA. This is what we have to have. We have to see dad's DNA. We know mom's human. All we need now is to recover nuclear DNA, and we know we've got a human being, no problem. So, 6 attempts. The Starchild, the human comes up perfect. That's Jason's. Human, perfect, standard, normal, human, nothing to it. 6 tests. Jason again, 6 attempts, primer dimer, nothing but. No recovery. No recovery. What does this mean? Dad is not human. If Dad was human, using human primers, it would pull right up. So we knew in 2003, the mother is human, the father is not. But what we need to know is how far from human is the father. Just to say that he's not human is not to say that he's alien. Because he could be just a hair, a whisker, or just a little blip away from human, and it wouldn't pick up. Right? This is what science argues. It's a garbage argument, but this is what they say. You can't say it's alien because you have to prove how far it is.
Which, to the best of my knowledge, they have not proven either way yet, but it is my belief that the father is not of a regular human origin, especially given all the evidence of the oddities of the Starchild. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the Starchild definitely creates a problem for Darwin? Do you think it blows out of the water the idea that we come from chimps? If everything you've heard tonight, do you think that we still may have evolved the way they tell us to, or do you think perhaps we may have arrived on this planet from elsewhere? All we have to do is apply a little common sense to the evidence, and in the end, ladies and gentlemen, you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right, that's it for this episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Radio Show for Thursday, February 11th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. The den may be closing for this weekend, ladies and gentlemen, but don't you worry, the weekend fun has only just begun. Now that the Dark Wolf's Den Show has kicked off the weekend right, we're going to hand the reins over to our network partner and our good buddy AJ the Ripon Rabbit. That's right. He'll be taking to the airwaves on Friday, February 12th, 2021, with a discussion on getting rich quick. There's been schemes since the beginning of mankind, and there will continue to be, and we need to know what to watch out for, and maybe ways that we can get rich quick by a more honest means. All that and more coming up tomorrow, Friday, February 12th, 2021. Then on Saturday, February 13th, 2021, AJ the Ripon Rabbit returns with another episode of the Ripon Rabbit Hole Live Show. It's 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. All episodes here on the network start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. And on Saturday, February 13th, our buddy AJ is going to be talking about ghost towns. That's right. There's ghost towns spread all across the country, and I'm sure across the world, and I've been to a couple myself. They are quite spooky, and there's nobody living there now but the ghosts. Such an interesting conversation. You guys do not want to miss this Saturday, February 13th, 2021. Then on Sunday, February 14th, 2021, AJ the Ripon Rabbit will take to the airwaves one more time with a discussion on anger. A very valid, important emotion, and an emotion that we need to be careful how we are showing ourselves when we feel it. Ladies and gentlemen, something we need to take in consideration and not into action at all times. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be the rounded out weekend this weekend here on Ripon Common Sense Radio. That's right. Speaking of Ripon, make sure you hop your way over to the RiponRabbitHole.com. That is RiponRabbitHole.com. That's right. Over there, you're going to find a load of fun. First, you want to sign up for your Backstage Pass. Make sure you have got the Backstage Pass and you are able to access all the benefits of the site. While you're there, make sure that you drop down the rabbit hole. That is our social media alternative over there on the RiponRabbitHole.com. We love hanging out over there 24/7. The conversation is continuing in the rabbit hole. That's right, down the rabbit hole. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you drop down and join us over there. Speaking of joining us, make sure that you join us in the 24/7 Backstage Lounge. That's where you're going to find me here in just a couple minutes after the show. And I would love for you guys to come hang out with us and continue talking about whatever you would like to discuss. That's right. We hang about back there every night, and we would love to have you join us backstage in the VIP lounge. Absolutely free, ladies and gentlemen. Come on by. Also, while you're on the RipOnRabbitHole.com, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. That's right. We will send out a newsletter every Wednesday, once a week, and make sure that you know all the topics we are talking about every week. And this is something that you can forward to your friends, your family, your family's friends, or your friends' family, and make sure they all know that come and join us and help us grow our community little by little. And speaking of community, ladies and gentlemen, it is an absolute honor and pleasure to have every last one of you guys around the world listen to us every week, from Ripon, Wisconsin, our home station, to the other 49 countries in which we are heard. We thank you guys so much for being along for the ride. That's right. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, Walt House, AJ the Ripon Rabbit, everybody involved in the Ripon Common Sense Radio, our wonderful mod team over on YouTube, on behalf of all these amazing folks, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And remember, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay awake, but dare to dream. Good night, everybody. How? Yeah. That's right.
Things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever Oh, what a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner. Is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner. Is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a world